Hi, so this video is definitely a well planned out, extremely cohesive video and not at all a buffer video for the fact that in real time I'm actively sobbing over my sewing machine, but maybe more accurately, my seam ripper. Actually, genuinely, I've been wanting to do this video for a while now because I really love taking on new and different types of projects, especially for other people, and I'm not at all experiencing withdrawals from Artfight. So here we have 3 commissions-ish that I received this year, all of incredibly different natures, but all incredibly fun projects nonetheless. First in the lineup, we have a commission that I did around March of this year. Rubinat reached out to me asking for some art of their bee-themed tiefling cleric, and I love bee, in theory, so I absolutely had to. Now just for a disclaimer, Rubinat did not ask me to put their character in a video. I asked permission and requested information about the character. I just really love the design elements and I think her concept is great. But in general, I never want to set the expectation that commissioning me to make art means that your art gets put in a YouTube video, popular channel or not. But on the other hand, I don't want to stress people out that their personal commission might end up online for all the internet to see. And I just wanted to put that out there for clarifications. Back to the character design, this is Marigold Abe, a knowledge domain cleric. The knowledge domain is a really great subclass, especially if you're a cleric that wants to venture beyond just healing and direct support spells. The first channel divinity you receive as a knowledge domain cleric is one that allows you proficiency with any skill or tool, and your second channel divinity that you get at 6th level allows you to peer into the mind of another creature and even influence it pretty considerably. You get all that on top of a really nice stack of spells that I personally would love to have at my disposal, like Identify, Suggestion, and at higher levels, Arcane Eye and Scrying. As you can see, this absolutely fantastic cleric is also bee themed, hence the last name Abe, which is the French word for bee, and I know my French is quite bad, but the root concept of bee clerics came from Rubinat's own D&D headcanon world building of a bee-themed deity entity that runs a hive-like library, from which clerics are dispatched to collect knowledge and information to bring back to the hive. Which this deity and concept is not part of the campaign that Marigold is actually currently a part of, but you know what? From the way that Rubinat described it, I had such a beautiful mind picture of the library and I needed to share that idea with you. That being said, Marigold has plenty of bee-themed details hidden throughout her outfit. As you can see, I gave her little hexagon buttons on her beekeeper overalls. There are a lot of hexagons and stripes and other beekeeper motifs throughout the design overall. In particular, there's a little malachite bee clipped onto her hair that will come up in the drawing later. It's actually a wondrous magical item that is just the bee-flavored version of the D&D item Figurine of Wondrous Power. These little statuettes are small enough to fit into a pocket, and in response to a command word will turn into a full-sized friendly creature for a certain duration. Many of the pre-built figurines that are in the original book are also able to be used as mounts and transportation, and the same goes for the little malachite bee that Marigold has. The bee, which was a birthday gift, turns into a giant bee that goes by the name of Buzzwald that Marigold is able to ride around on the back of. Also, I just really love the gigantic quartz crystal that is sitting in Marigold's backpack. It's giving "this here's my banishing rock" energy, and I am so here for it. Marigold is part of a party of 4. In addition to herself, there is a changeling shadow sorcerer, a minotaur paladin, and a human barbarian. While of course everyone has their intertwining stories, the current objective revolves around the minotaur paladin, who is also a baron working under the jurisdiction of a king who has recently passed away. The party's goal is to unite smaller towns and pieces of land to disrupt the continued spread and ever-encroaching force of a secondary evil baron who wishes to usurp the throne. I think I say it pretty often, especially when I make a video on it, but I am always pleasantly surprised when I remember that line art is a style that I'm capable of. I do always wish I understood how to utilize line weight a little better, which I also feel like is the other thing that I say every time I do line art, but still I do genuinely love the relaxing process that is lining a sketch. And the bonus part of my line art style is that it has a sharpness to it that my personal painty style doesn't have, which means I get to add a bunch of little highlights and chunky shading, and I find it very satisfying. But with that, we are already at the end of commission number 1, Marigold Abbé. You may notice that in the reveal footage, Marigold has a few minor changes to her appearance that didn't appear in the speed drop, but those were just changes made in post to sort of make Marigold a little more accurate to Rubenot's vision, so hopefully nobody feels like they missed out on too much. But of course, a very special thank you to Rubenot for sharing this character and the information that went along with her. I absolutely adore her concept and her design, and I had a blast being part of her design process, and overall, I am super satisfied with how she came out, so thank you so much. And on to the next one. On to a very different commission, although this one might look a little familiar to a previous project. Yes, I'm painting another server book. Earlier this summer, I painted my server book for work with betta fish and some Van Gogh, and it caught the eye of probably my favorite coworker at the place I work right now. In general, she already loves Van Gogh, and I know she has a replica print hanging in her home. She's got tons of accessories that have Van Gogh prints on them, and she just about lost it when I first brought in my server book. She wanted to show it to everyone, and that's when I decided that I needed to make her one too, also inspired by Van Gogh, of course. I was deciding between a couple of different paintings, but just kept getting drawn back to his Almond Blossoms painting, so that's where we begin. Actually, I didn't just decide to paint her a gift because she likes Van Gogh or because she showered me with compliments. She's actually one of the coworkers with a little bit more seniority, and she just went the extra mile when it came to making my transition into a new place really easy. She always makes me feel very appreciated for the work that I do, and she stands up for me and gets other managers to support me whenever I have issues with scheduling or if my needs aren't being met or being disregarded in any way. Doing this painting was absolutely nothing in comparison to the way that she has had my back this past summer, and I know she will continue being here for me however long I keep working at said location, and hopefully continued after. I trust her with my life, and I would do almost anything to stay in her favor. She is an amazing person. I did a few things differently with this book than I did with my own book because it is for someone else that I care very much about. I taped up the edges first so I didn't get any paint on the inside like I did with my own book, and I also didn't start with a white base coat. I have always loved using the Liquitex heavy body acrylic paints, not sponsored or anything, just genuinely I've been using Liquitex brand paints for years, and I'm so comfortable with their thickness, how fast they dry, the way they mix, and how pigmented they are. They're not a particularly budget-friendly brand of paint, but also the coverage they have is kind of incredible, and also a little goes a really long way. Since Liquitex paint is already so pigmented, and I found out that the texture of the server book actually holds on to paint relatively well, painting directly on the black surface did not present to be any issue at all. The one thing that a white base coat did add to my book was a cool texture, but instead of giving the overall canvas texture, I wanted to give each individual layer its own texture. So the background has a texture that is sort of similar to the way lime wash is applied to actual walls in homes. It's done in these short crisscrossed brush strokes, and that's exactly what I did to the sky layer. Then I began working on the branches, and that actually took a really long time. There is actually very little brown and red used in the painting at all. Even the yellows lean more on the green side of things. In addition to this, the texture on the branches are mostly created by the way different colors layered onto the brush. And I don't know if I've said this before, but fast strokes that are only partially blended art is not really my painting art style. I tend to do a lot of blending even in my digital art, so much so that you would actually think that I may have gotten into oil painting at some point in my life, but fun fact, I did not. Now, my major mistake was actually picking a spot in the painting that had really interesting branches, but I didn't actually take the time to measure the composition out. So there were very, very cool branches, but consequently there were not a ton of florals in the area that I chose to paint. So I just decided to wing it and add flowers where I felt looked nice. So you will find that this is not in fact an exact replica, not even a close replica. It's just an almond blossom tree done in an exceedingly similar style to Van Gogh, with a little bonus detail. On my book I included little betta fish because I think they're neat, and also in memoriam of my good fish Floyd, with a bonus fish from my current very much alive and well good fish Noodles. On this book that I'm working on in the video, I drew a pair of corgi ears. My coworker has a very loved pet corgi who is just the cutest, sweetest little guy. He really is such a sweetheart, and I just wanted to add a very personal touch to it. For one reason or another, it was incredibly difficult to find a Van Gogh painting of corgis specifically. I did hate how bright the orange of his fur was at first. I think I did even paint over my first try and move it over a bit before trying again, but eventually I ended up with a product that I personally think was not too bad, not too shabby. But what I think isn't really what matters. What's more important was my coworker's thoughts. She thought it was incredible, but in fact she thinks it's so incredible that she is not going to use it for work. She's actually going to frame it and hang it up because she loves it so much and refuses to do anything to ruin it. Although on that note, I did spray both of our books with a polyacrylic sealant, and the paint on my book has had no chipping. Sure, the book is a little worse for wear, but the painting itself is just fine. Nonetheless, she insisted that it was too beautiful and had no place being used at work, which I am so flattered. I think that's so sweet of her. She's such a genuine person, and to know that a little of my time spent brought her so much joy, it just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy on the inside. Okay, last project. I was going to make this one have its own video, but the process ended up being such a pain and so repetitive that I was not about to make y'all watch 10 minutes of me battling with hot glue because that is unnecessary. And second of all, I'm putting out the reveal video without being 100% sure that I really like the result of the work that I put in, but I have literally been trying to get this done for weeks, and at a certain point I'm going to either have to give in or start over. Originally, I was only going to print the head of the snake, but then my partner found this cool jointed snake STL, and suddenly our house is full of snakes. And also, the cats were obsessed with them. Who needs expensive cat toys for whatever reason that I keep going to the pet store to buy, when you could just give them plastic pipettes and 3D printed snakes instead? I don't know why my cats love plastic so much. Is that weird? Is something wrong with them? Anyways, so why am I trying to print snakes, and what does this have to do with hot glue? Well, a different coworker found out that she and I are mutually into cosplay and anime, so she commissioned me to make a prop for her cosplay for Openai Iguro from Demon Slayer. That's right, I'm making a little Kaburamaru to hang out around her neck. This project was supposed to be completed way at the beginning of July, possibly even at the end of June. Unfortunately, the post office decided to hold my faux snakeskin hostage, and instead of confronting the people at the post office about how I shouldn't have to pay an additional $20 for shipping from an item ordered via Amazon Prime, I went to Etsy and found one of my favorite fabric wholesale resellers and bought the next best thing, which ended up being this sort of spandexy material with a cool snake print on it. And to answer your burning questions, I still have not talked to the post office or Amazon about the package, and to my knowledge it is still being held hostage. LOL, just non-confrontational, anxious and introverted girly things. Anyways, the spine that came with the snake head was really convenient and posable as long as the poses you were going for were limp noodle or squiggle on the ground. Since the idea was to have Kaburamaru sit nicely on the cosplayer's shoulders, I needed to add something to help hold its shape, like a nice thick wire. I pretty much hot glued that directly to what I guess is the spine. It took a couple of tries, but I managed to eventually get it glued securely in such a way that allowed the snake to still have a pretty good range of motion even around the head and neck. I then wrapped this snake wire hot glue concoction in some quilting batting, which honestly I wish I had put more of. That's one of the things I disliked about the final project, because in the first draft that I had in my head, it was supposed to be a very soft, comfortable snake because it's going to be on a person's neck for a very long time. But because the body ended up being printed and I didn't want the body to be significantly more padded than the head, I only put a little bit of stuffing, and obviously the final result was not particularly soft. I was afraid that more padding would not only change the size significantly, but also make it hard to put the snake sock onto the body. That's right, I said what I said, snake sock. Or perhaps if you're on comfortable speaking terms, in which case he's alright with you calling him Snock for short. So to make the snock, simply take your snake, measure approximately enough to make a sock for his entire body, sew the edge closed, serging the cut edge to make sure no fraying happens, and then slip the snock onto your snake spine. Or try to do that and then realize your snock is so small, so you sew a second snock which serendipitously sits on the snake's spine snugly. Sock obtained. suck. Now we come to the part that was absolutely unnecessarily complicated and tedious, so I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. The original plan was to attach the fabric to the head with hot glue, then create little glue dot scales to cover all the 3D printing defects and also to cover the point at which the fabric meets the head. Unfortunately, the glue dots ended up having a lot of depth to them, and I wanted them to flatten out a bit more, but double unfortunately, I don't have any nice silicone tools for crafting that would have been good shaping tools for hot glue. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did try several times to just do it with my finger, but you know, that super duper was a good idea and went very well. The only good decision that I made at this point in the process was covering the bottom of the face in foam clay. I should have done the rest of the head in foam clay as well, but I'm just not super comfortable with that medium. I would like to get better at it though. At this point, I did try to do a nice white base coat on it, but what? So to try and smooth it out again, I took an old soldering iron and a hot glue gun and tried to make it have a flatter surface. And I almost took this idea all the way to the very end because it was always just so close to being exactly what I wanted. But whenever I went to paint it, the dips and the ridges were just awful. And when you're working with hot glue, it's clear and it's really hard to see any sort of depth before I painted it. At some point, I cut off almost all of the hot glue that I had stacked on this poor snake's head and coated everything in Elmer's glue all. I was just hoping that at some point one of these glues would level out into all the cracks and ridges and create a relatively smooth surface. But alas, after about 3 days of repeatedly adding hot glue, using the soldering iron, painting it, adding Elmer's glue all, I finally caved and decided that what I really needed to do was get some air dry clay, use that to create the smoother surface that I so desperately desired. And it finally worked. Kinda. It did crack a little, and I mean, there were some weird temperature changes the night it was drying. There was a squishy starting base, and then of course working with some pretty thin watery layers overall. But no big deal, I once again douse it in glue. Elmer's glue, to be precise. That way it has something with a little stretch and give holding it together, and also it seeped pretty nicely into the material and the cracks and made it look a little smoother. And finally, we can have our little painting montage. Clearly the head is still pretty lumpy despite my days of effort, but this is probably the best outcome despite all the trial and error that I had.
You're so close. I'm so scared for you. Please.
I also use a little gray color instead of a stark black to paint on the little lines for scales that you see in the manga or anime. And you know what, I'm not super sure about this choice, but leaving the head completely white did feel very incomplete. But you know what, with that's our last commission in the bag, I think. I don't know, I feel like I could have done a better job on Kabutomaru. This was my very first time making any sort of prop like this, something posable with a lot of different textures and so many different materials that all need to blend. I'm trying really hard to be kind to myself about this one. Even if the girl who commissioned it does like it, I just want to try my hand at something like this again. Maybe even another one of these snakes. I don't know, hard to say. But that does bring us to the end of this week's video. Boy howdy, is it a handful. I'm so grateful for everyone who's been supporting me through my art career, whether that's on my channel as an avid subscriber, as someone who has commissioned art from me, or as someone new who just decided to watch the video. It really means so much to me. That being said, if you are interested in commissioning me, or even just info dumping some cool world building lore at me, my DMs are currently open on Instagram and the not Twitter app. However, I am booked with projects and events until the end of October and or middle of November, so it might be a while before I can pick up commissions again, or it might not be because I am over ambitious and always bite off more than I can chew. So, you know, we'll see what I think I can handle. What could go wrong? Who knows? Not me.